Good morning. My name is Rebecca Henderson, and I want to begin by thanking you for my experience yesterday in the conference. This is a room full of amazing people with huge hearts trying to make the most important kind of change. And I'm honored and delighted to be here. And Deb, may I say, person with a huge heart trying to make the most important kind of change. So thank you very much. Peter asked me to tell you a little bit about my story, how I got to be in this room, which is not obvious. I have an engineering degree from MIT and a PhD in neoclassical economics from Harvard. So, what am I doing in this room? And I'm a professor at the Harvard Business School. So what the heck is going on? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my story, a tiny bit about what I do now, and then an even smaller bit, but Peter insisted, on what I think is going to happen in the future. Because I think about change and innovation. I've spent my whole life thinking about change and innovation, and that's what I'm thinking about now. So, who am I? Well, I am first and foremost a tree hugger, an absolutely unapologetic tree hugger. I grew up in a rather difficult family situation, highly privileged, but very difficult. And so I found my solace and my home and my hope in trees. There was a huge beech tree outside the house I spent a lot of my growing up in. And I used to lie on one of the lower branches. I don't know if you've ever done this. Lie on a lower branch and look up at the sky through the trees and smell the branches and feel the air. So that's my background. But, my life was a little bit difficult. So the other thing I was really interested growing up in was power. I wanted to know what the heck was going on in the world. And I didn't want what was happening to my mother to happen to me. So no one was going to push me around, sonny boy. So I went to MIT, did a degree in engineering. I thought engineering's power. And I discovered, this is in the 1980s, I was a student in that dorm right across the way, that actually it wasn't about the engineering, it wasn't about the tech, it was about the money. It was about the money. So I went to HBS, I did my MBA, I did my PhD in neoclassical economics, I became a Harvard Business School professor. Don't mess with me. It was kind of an odd thing to do in retrospect. It's not really who I am, but it's super interesting. Super, super interesting. For 20 years, my research was about change. When I was here at MIT, I was the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management, which was a coincidence, but a deeply ironic coincidence, because that's what I did. I studied this process. So 20 years of research in a minute. Are you ready? Industries turn out small. Nobody really knows what they're doing. This is not about brewing beer. This is about trying all kinds of different things. So think Kodak. They're like, oh, could we make photography like for consumers? What would that be like? Kind of all sorts of different things. They invent consumer photography. Takeoff occurs. They become unbelievably rich. In their time, people used to say of Kodak, there was nothing more profitable that was legal. And then they mature. And they're a film company, and excuse me, we got digital. I did actually quite a lot of work with Kodak. And at one stage, in the early 2000s, they were talking about disruption, like disruption was going to happen, it was really here. But if you looked at their budget, they were projecting conventional film to just keep growing. Just keep growing. So this was my life for 20 years, super interesting. I spent a lot of time in Finland working with Nokia, trying to persuade them Apple was a threat. It's been a super interesting life, super interesting life. And then I saw Al Gore give his presentation. I saw an inconvenient truth, and I'm one of the people that was radicalized by an inconvenient truth. Because I was a tree hugger, and I'd always kept my professional and personal lives separate. So I'd been trekking in Alaska, I'd been to some of the great forests of the world, but that was what I did over here. At business, I was all business. I've got more than 30 years of experience on big deal boards, including a Fortune 200 biopharma. I was all about the money. And then I wasn't. I was about the planet. Now, I could interject here a little talk about climate change. Let me just summarize it. It's really bad. We're in for so much suffering. We have the resources to do something, but we're not doing it. But I took this to the Harvard Business School, where I've been recruited by this time with the immortal lines, "Rebecca, we missed the financial crisis. It's your job to make sure we don't miss the climate crisis." This is 2010. Spent 15 years reimagining capitalism in a world on fire. The fastest growing elective at the Harvard Business School in the last 20 years. So successful, the dean asked me to take it to the first year. It was fun. This is all about how you can make money by doing the right thing. I'm all about the money. What is the business case? How can you let the world burn? It's bad for business. So you can make money and you can solve the big problems. And you should know that here and in all of my work, I lead with climate, but I actually think climate is part of a much bigger issue. That inequality and racism, they're all part of our failure to connect to ourselves, to each other, and to the natural world, to seeing unbelievable beings as objects to be used and bought and sold. So for me, it's all one thing, but you can make a bunch of money doing the right thing. And this is important. We have more than 300 cases showing that this is the case. We have paper after paper showing that firms that treat their employees with dignity and respect absolutely can compete with everyone else and pay higher wages, and are in many cases more agile, more creative, more innovative. This was the heart of my work for 15 years. It's not just me. There's lots of us doing this work. So we know that firms that are anchored in purpose and meaning, that are authentically trying to make a difference in the world, trigger all kinds of mechanisms inside the organization. Each of these arrows is a group of scientific studies, leads to alignment, intrinsic motivation, and trust. It drives performance. We know it's possible. It's hard to do, because the people who invest in you are continually saying, do you really have to treat everyone so well? Couldn't we make a bit more money by cutting the wage costs? You're swimming in a sea that's fundamentally hostile to this. But even in a hostile environment, these kinds of firms can thrive. I think, that you can get about halfway there to solving the climate crisis on a completely make money all the way basis. I think there's a lot of reason to believe that. So this is good, huh? This is fun. These are all my friends that I wrote case studies about. These are like real people running these kinds of firms. It's real. It's out there. And here's my theory of how you change the whole world so the world is like this. All you have to do is make money and do the right thing. Then you have to get together as an industry and address the problems together that you can't do alone. There are more than 200 industry-level cooperative efforts. Let's slow down, let's get rid of fast fashion and textiles, let's treat all the workers well, all this stuff happening. Let's rewire finance. Could spend about 2 days talking about this, 2 years. And last but not least, we have a democracy problem. If we don't get the rules right, none of this is going to work. So you, as a business person, have a strong interest in maintaining a strong democracy. That's where we see growth. That's where we see healthy societies. You really don't want to end up in country X. You know what it's like to do business in places like that. You don't want the US to be like that. So it was a good story. I loved it. It was a big success. My book came out in April of 2020. You might remember that April 2020 was a weird time to have a book come out. It turned out, though, that publishing a book called Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, in a world that was actually on fire, was a brilliant strategic move. The book got translated into 7 languages. I had invitations, hundreds of invitations to speak all over the world. I gave Zooms to 20,000 Harvard Business School alumni. It was fantastic. It was everything that I'd always hoped for. I got the invitations to Davos I've been angling for years. That's a big deal gathering in Switzerland of all the senior people. I was inside the room. You know what happened? I got really depressed. I got really depressed. I got everything I'd been working for all those years, and I realized what you knew like 3 minutes into this presentation, which was wrong tree, baby. Running up the wrong tree. That they weren't going to do it. We could have done this. We could do it now. But they weren't going to do it. We weren't going to do it. And when I say we, forgive me, I mean the privileged, highly educated elites. Not going to do it. Rather make 8% on our capital than 5% and have a living, vibrant, open world. Wow. So I went on retreat, took 2 years off. I did about a week of silent retreat a month for 2 years, 3 years. I'm still doing it. Found it immensely helpful. Reconnecting with myself and who I was and what we needed, and came back thinking, well, can we complement Homo economicus, also known just amongst ourselves, no repeating please, totally psychopathic, with like human ways of being in the world? We've built an economic system that has encouraged seeing people as instruments, strip mining the natural environment, strip mining the social environment. Hey guys, let's do it another way. We know, insert huge lists of references here, that humans can operate from a very different place. I know you know that. So let's do that. Instead of modeling ourselves on Roman Abramovich, worth $9 billion, owns 16 yachts, let us rebalance that by modeling ourselves on Mara Dale, my son's high school teacher, who makes about $63,000 a year, maybe. Let us rebalance. Let us rebalance. So I'm teaching a new course because I think through teaching for reasons that I don't quite understand. So I have 70 people. They come from every graduate professional school at Harvard except dentistry. So that's law, politics, business, education, public health, and urban design. Architecture. And what are we doing? We are spending 50% of our time in what I now know, because I went to the conference yesterday, is social emotional learning. But I didn't know that was what I was doing. I was just spending half the time in small groups, check-ins, circles. We were singing, we're dancing, we're reading poetry, because I just knew that I could say to them, look, there's another way to be human. And they go, that's very interesting, Professor Henderson. But if I gave them a chance to experience it and to build community in the classroom, it would become real. And the idea that we could actually do that in the world wouldn't be just some wacky idea. It might be something we could actually do. So 50% of the time in social emotional learning, 3 questions in the course: what is going on? And you know that what is going on is much bigger even than Trump. What is going on is the whole foundation of Western civilization. The objectification of ourselves, others, and nature is a problem. And we got to reclaim that. But you work up to that gradually, right? How do we hold it? Because opening to what's really going on, and so I have so much admiration for everyone in this room because you're open to it. How do we hold what's happening? And the answer is by centering and community. And there's 1,000 ways to do that, but I'm going to invite you to choose one and work it. And what is it skillful to do? And for me, this is bringing people into the class who are trying to revolutionize business. So all my friends from business, you saw their photographs. I'm getting them in, like, no, you can do this. politics, community. I don't have a long enough course to do education, but clearly I need to make time for schools. Like, this is real. Because what I learned from doing Reimagining Capitalism is people don't believe you unless they can touch it and see it, right? You have to see that there's another way to do things. And so I'm showing the students that there's another way to do things. I think rebalancing our sense of what it means to be human can rebuild the world. And I think we might be moving towards what Joanna Macy, that some of you may be familiar with, might be a great turning. I don't think we can fix things. I don't think it's going to be okay. But I think we could really do something amazing in the next 50 to 100 years. So I'm out of time, so I would just say very briefly, can I have a couple of minutes? So what would it take to make this mainstream? And again, I learned this yesterday. How do we go from doing to also being, right? So you recognize these curves, right? This was the first 20 years of my research. We are trying to do, and I mean you too, we are trying to do something extraordinary. And we're trying to do it at multiple levels, individual, organizational, and institutional. So I just wanted to alert you to the fact that it's going to be hard, right? I spent 20 years, I worked with Kodak, I worked with Nokia. They had every reason to switch and they did not. So why is it so hard? So particularly the people who are doing well are deeply armored against seeing what's going on. If you're making out like a bandit, and that includes, you know, I swim in the bubble. The bubble is me. You know, we have beautiful houses. We fly to Europe. It's gorgeous. What do you mean that we're going to see rolling systemic breakdowns in key services, energy, transportation, food within the next 10 years? It's like, and is that my fault? It can't be my fault. It can't be that everything I base my life on, all my institutions, is like wrong. So that's the first problem. Second problem, we're not going to make any money. Nice, Rebecca, but how am I going to live? Like, what do we do? What does it mean? You're calling for the age of Aquarius? We all love each other right now? Like, I don't know. And last but not least, there's nothing I can do. I'm not even sure we can do it. I may as well just stay asleep as the world goes down. So this is a big deal. So what did I learn about how you do it? So what I learned is in fact not on that slide because I did the slides late last night. I tell you what I learned. You need a business case. That is, people need to believe it is possible to survive on the other side. Now, I know all of you know that, right? You have to reassure everyone around you that the kids are going to keep learning and they're going to pass this and they're going to get into school and they're going to get into the college and don't panic. Right? So you need the business case, you need the rational, and you need the brain scans, and, you know, just take care of that cognitive, rational, scared part of people, right? But then in firm after firm, because I didn't just work with firms that failed, I worked with firms that made the transition. And how did they make it? They had done all the math, but they made it because they wanted to. Because they cared about their customers, their employees, and their children. That was always the secret sauce that drove the transition. And I'll close by giving you just a couple of examples. The first example is from a large drug company where they were trying to introduce a new technology that would mean that every time they sold a drug, they would sell a diagnostic test. So they would know if the diagnostic test was going to work. And the head of marketing came to the CEO and said, if we do this, we're going to sell a lot less drugs because the diagnostic test is going to show that, you know, they don't work and we shouldn't do this. And the CEO looked at him and he said, let me get this right. You're saying we should go on selling drugs that don't work to sick people because it will maintain our revenue stream. And the guy looked at him and said, okay, maybe not. Now, I tell you this story for two reasons. One, because that company made the right choice. And two, because increasingly we live in a world where people will say, yeah, sure. That's our first order, make the investors rich. So we're in a difficult moment here. So second story, large chemical company, talking about all the good stuff they were doing to save the world, and this is a company that's for real, and they were really trying to change the way they do things, and the investors were just sitting there going like, yeah, tell us your green wokeness stuff. What will it do for me? Nothing. So finally the CEO in desperation, he said, do you guys have children? Do you have children? Now tell me you don't care. It changed the whole conversation. So people are miserable. The world is failing and breaking. The best predictor of making these kinds of transitions in the commercial world was getting very close to bankrupt. It opens things up. It opens things up. So we are the entrepreneurs, the use cases, the you can do this differently. Your heart is breaking. We can do this differently. And we can begin to lay the groundwork for change. We are doing it. Those cities you want to build, that's what we need. Thank you very much.